Okay, my name is Kaleigh Research, and I'm a senior here at Frisco High School. This is my second year in ISM, and I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about me. I have two passions in my life, which are science and music. Music is a huge part of my life. I started playing French horn when I was in the 6th grade, and I haven't looked back. Right now I play in the Wind Symphony at Frisco High along with the GDYO, and I play at church as well and like other stuff. So I love playing horn, and right now it's actually my plan for college as well. So hopefully that'll work out. We'll see. I also really love science. When I was in 7th grade, we were involved in the science fair, and I did really well. I studied like how paper fades or something, I don't know. And I ended up winning state, and I realized that maybe science is something that I'm actually good at. So I thought I should continue studying that and consider that as a possible career. And last year in ISM 1, I studied genetics, and with that I created a karyotype of all the different chromosomes and studied different genes and what diseases are on each chromosome, and it was very complicated. I really enjoyed genetics and I learned a lot about it, but this year I wanted to do something that was more hands-on, because in genetics, the geneticist usually only talks like to the parents, and they don't really do much with the children. But in neonatology, which is what I'm studying this year, they get to help the children more directly. And my goals for this year would include learning more about neonatology and deciding whether or not I want to do this as a career. And in the future, I'm planning on studying music in college and possibly also majoring in biology. I'm not sure yet, so we'll see. My quote for this year is, "There is no foot too small that it cannot leave an imprint on this world." To me, this quote means that every single birth, every child, whether they survive or not, always leaves an imprint. And I think through neonatology, we can help every child, and no matter how sick they are, they still leave an impact on their parents and everyone that is around them. So, what is neonatology? A lot of people actually have no idea what it is, and that surprised me. I've known about it since the 6th grade because it affected my family when my cousin was born with dwarfism. So I don't know, I just kind of assumed everyone knew about it, but turns out it's not a lot of people know what it is. So the definition of neonatology is a subspecialty of pediatrics that consists of the medical care of newborn infants, especially the ill or premature newborn infant. So what that means is basically when a baby's born, usually 90% of the time everything is fine, but the other 10%, sometimes they'll have an anomaly before birth, or sometimes they'll be born and unexpectedly there's something wrong with them. So at that point the neonatologist comes in and assesses them and decides what needs to be done. A big part of neonatology is premature births. 1 in 10 births in most hospitals are premature. This statistic surprised me. I didn't realize that so many babies were premature. Full term is considered 36 weeks or over, and then premature would be 36 weeks and under. And part of my studies this year has been learning all the complications that come along with a premature birth. In the NICU, which is where most neonatologists work, NICU stands for Newborn Intensive Care Unit. They have large incubators all around, and that's where they care for all of the ill infants. This year, I've done a lot of research to learn more about neonatology. One of the first things that I learned about when I started researching was fetal surgery. This is, to quote one of the guys that I had the opportunity to interview, a very sexy surgery, as he said. Apparently it's very risky. We don't actually do them in Dallas right now because it's a very new procedure. What fetal surgery is when they take the baby while it's still inside the mom, open the mom up, open the uterus, do surgery on the baby while the baby's still connected to the placenta, hopefully not causing the mom to go into labor, because if you mess too much in there, the mom can go into labor, and then you have the baby that's born with a lot of problems, and now they're also premature. So it's very risky. Plus, it's really hard on the mom as well. So the jury's still out on whether or not it's actually going to work. But we'll see. For spina bifida, apparently fetal surgery is very helpful in this instance, which was interesting to me because last year in my studies in genetics, I saw a child with a myelomeningocele, which is the most severe form of spina bifida. And so it made me wonder whether or not a fetal surgery could have helped her. My second research assessment this year was on bronchopulmonary dysplasia, which is a chronic lung disease that involves abnormal lung tissue. This also can be shortened to BPD. Infants with BPD, they're not born with it. It's usually caused by lung injury shortly after birth. Babies that are born extremely premature have very underdeveloped lungs. The lungs usually don't develop until around 26 weeks, so babies that are born before that point often don't even have alveoli at all. So they're often put on a ventilator, but a ventilator is very harsh. It's a lot of pounding on the lungs, and so that can often cause lung injury, which then leads to BPD, which is often deadly, but they've found a lot of different ways to treat it now. My third research assessment was on twin-twin transfusion syndrome, which means in twins that share a common placenta, so identical twins, there's multiple blood vessels that they'll share, and in TTTS, one of the blood vessels will supply one of the twins with a huge amount of blood and the other twin with a very small amount of blood, as you can see by the picture. So one of the twins will end up being massive and the other one is extremely small. And through fetal surgery, they found that they can cut the blood vessels with lasers, and theoretically the twins will survive and become healthy. And right now I'm also studying a lot about lung development because when a baby is born very premature, that's one of the first things that neonatologists look at is their breathing, because the lungs are so underdeveloped. So I'm also considering using that from my original work, how the lungs develop. This year I conducted 6 informational interviews that helped me learn a lot more about the field of neonatology. My first one was with Dr. Philip Schall. He actually currently does pulmonary and vascular biology, which means the study of the heart and the lungs. And so right now he's more involved in adult medicine, but he's extremely renowned in the field of neonatology. For the last 30 years, he's done tons of research. One of the things that he just discovered, which I thought was really amazing, was how diabetes and obesity are correlated. Right now, obesity is a huge problem in America, and often this causes type 2 diabetes. And when the mom has type 2 diabetes, this can then be passed down to the child in the form of, I don't remember, the opposite of diabetes, where there's too much insulin. So he's found a way to hopefully reverse this and find a treatment where hugely obese people cannot have diabetes. He couldn't share that with me yet because they're not sure on that, but he's done a lot of research with rats, and I thought that was really interesting. He's just recently made such a huge discovery. I also learned a lot about the newer technology in the field of neonatology at this interview. One of the things he told me about was an oscillator, which is if a baby's in extreme respiratory failure, they will take them off the ventilator and put them on an oscillator, which is a device that vibrates the air rather than pumping it in and out. And he told me this really interesting story about how the oscillator apparently came to be that I'd like to share with you. So apparently, Mandy will like this, there was a dog that they were doing surgery on, and they had the dog on a ventilator, and they were playing really loud rock music in the background. And apparently, someone accidentally switched off the ventilator, and they realized that the dog was still pink, but he wasn't breathing on his own, so they weren't sure how that happened, but he still had the tube in his lungs. And then they switched off the rock music, and he turned blue, and then they turned the rock music back on, and he turned pink again. So they realized that apparently, the rock music was vibrating the air down the tube, which was creating an oscillating effect. So apparently the dog could breathe. So according to Dr. Shaw, that's how the oscillator came to be. Everyone else I've asked about that story wasn't so sure about that. But I thought it was really interesting that he actually believes that. So I learned a lot about new technology from him. It was also a really good interview. He was extremely nice and very open to all of my questions. My second interview was with Dr. Rashmin Savani. He is the chief of neonatology, so I was a little bit intimidated because he had such a high position, but in the end, it was a really good interview. We met at a corner bakery in downtown Dallas. It was a breakfast interview, and I learned a lot about what to do at a breakfast interview. Namely, you should not order bacon because it turns out bacon's finger food, and I didn't think about that until after because I was like trying to eat my bacon, but I don't know, it didn't go so well with a fork. He laughed at me. So I learned what to and what not to order at a breakfast interview. This is also where I learned a lot about BPD. He has done so many different studies. He's actually been studying one molecule, hyaluronic acid, for 25 years. And he learned a lot about how HA can prevent BPD, but then also the side effects of administering that. He also basically wrote the book on surfactant, which is a substance that they can give babies when they're born that is usually naturally produced, but with surfactant, it helps them breathe easier. And I also learned about exit procedures, where this is similar to a fetal surgery, but in this procedure, the baby is already like about to be born. So they do like a C-section, but then they keep the baby hooked to the placenta, do the surgery, and then have the baby born. This is what he described as very sexy. I thought that was really funny. We only do 1 to 2 a year at Parkland, but I thought it was really interesting that we still do them in Dallas because we're not doing a lot of other fetal surgeries right now, so that would mean that it must be very helpful. My third interview was with Dr. Becky Ennis. She works a lot at Clements Hospital right now, which is a new hospital through UT Southwestern. From her, I learned how hard it is to be a neonatologist with a family. At the time, her daughter was really sick during my interview, and she had actually canceled my interview, but I neglected to look at my email before I left. So I showed up to the interview and then read my email and realized she'd canceled. And then she emailed me again and said, never mind, I can come. So I learned that I should check my email beforehand. It turned out okay, but she ended up having to bring her daughter with her, which was cool because her daughter was really nice. So it wasn't a problem, but I learned that I should check my email beforehand. Dr. Ennis works a lot in the delivery room, which was something I hadn't seen before. Everyone else at Parkland and Children's, they have a whole separate team for the delivery room, but since Clements is such a small hospital, she gets to do that as well. She also told me about a new technique called cooling, where if a baby has a severe brain injury, they put them on a cooling blanket and cool their brain and the rest of their body down to 8 degrees below normal body temperature, which will actually reduce swelling and blood flow and has shown a lot of positive effects in the future for babies that have severe brain injury. And I also learned about private practice versus in a teaching hospital. In private practice, physicians get to do a lot more procedures and surgeries versus in an academic setting. Those are usually reserved for residents and fellows, so they can learn about like how to do it. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought about trying to contact someone in private practice, but they're very hard to contact actually. They have no contact information at all on any of their websites, so I was not able to follow up on that. My fourth interview is with Dr. Charles Rosenfeld. He is a neonatologist through UT Southwestern, and from this interview I learned a lot about confirming ahead. We ended up canceling this interview 3 times before I was actually able to attend, but I was really glad I did. It was an amazing interview, and he was extremely nice, and he knew everything about the field, I felt like. I also learned that when I grow up, I cannot commute. On the way home from this interview, I drove for 2 hours before I was able to get home. So that was terrible. I learned some practical information from that. He was one of the first people that told me that fetal surgery, he does not believe it will become prominent in the future. He thinks that it's going to fail and that it's too risky. So that was an interesting point of view compared to everyone else. I also learned about how my studies in genetics last year connect to my studies in neonatology this year. He told me that 10 to 15% of babies in the NICU are because of a genetic anomaly, which was a lot higher than I expected since most of the diseases I saw last year were about 1 in 100,000. And finally, he told me that neonatologists have to attend all C-sections, which I didn't know because 10% of all births right now are a C-section. And because Parkland has over 12,000 births a year, the neonatologists have to attend a lot of births. And my fifth interview was with Dr. Natalie Frost. She runs the fetal center at Children's Hospital. The fetal center is a place where expecting parents can come and have conferences with the different doctors through all of the subspecialties, as well as a neonatologist, so it's a common place to meet. It's a very new idea that most hospitals haven't tried yet, but it's going very well for her. At the fetal surgery, they offer a lot, at the fetal center, they offer a lot of different services, one of which is comfort care, which was extremely sad and depressing, but it's something that I looked up to her for doing because I'm sure it's extremely hard to do and to work with families. When a baby is not going to make it and they know that before the baby is born, they can offer different services that would help the parents cope. Some of those would include photography if the baby's going to live for a couple weeks. They can Photoshop out all of the tubes and that kind of thing so they can have pictures of their newborn. So that was really sad to hear about, but it was a different point of view because often we only hear the happy stories and how everyone ends well, but this was very different from everyone I talked to before. I also learned about two conditions that are a lot more common than I thought they were, which were omphalocele and gastroschisis. This is when the baby's intestines are born outside the body. I was not expecting this at all. Turns out that's actually pretty common. And at the fetal center, they're able to show the baby pictures. Not show the baby pictures. Show the parents pictures about what to expect. So when their baby's born with these conditions, it won't be the first time they've ever seen this, so they're not completely shocked. And I also learned about different studies that are being done right now in the field of neonatology, such as donor breast milk and the cooling techniques that I've already told you about. And my fifth interview was with Dr. Wyckoff, and she's on the newborn resuscitation team. She is world-renowned in her abilities and her research in newborn resuscitation. She actually travels all over the world and teaches people about how to resuscitate newborns with CPR and that kind of thing. She also told me about blood contamination between the mother and baby, meaning if some of the baby's blood is mixed with the mother's and they have different blood types, this can cause a host of different problems. So what they do when the baby's born, they take all of the blood out of the baby and put different blood back in, at the same time, so the baby still has blood in it. And so they basically change the baby's blood type for a couple days until the bone marrow is able to reproduce, because the baby would be creating antibodies that would be fighting off their own blood type. So that was really interesting. I didn't know that was possible to change someone's blood type for a couple days. And then finally I learned about abruption, which is a serious problem where the placenta separates before birth, and then they would have to do a very rapid C-section. So I learned about a lot of different procedures that I hadn't heard of before. I felt like this was a very unique interview, and I also got to see Parkland for the first time. which I'd been wanting to do since the hospital's so new, and it was beautiful. And finally, for my original work, I'm planning on studying the development of the lungs from conception until birth, and then make various models illustrating each stage. And I feel like this would be helpful to both parents and medical students, because it would teach them about what the lungs look like and what is going on inside the baby's lungs before they're born. Thank you for listening. Oh God, that was so long. 20 minutes.